Welcome, everyone, to the Secret Love Story channel, a place where we explore heartfelt love stories and family dynamics. Today, we embark on a new journey, sharing genuine and profound moments of love and the challenges within family life. Let's embrace these wonderful emotions together. A millionaire is enjoying a lavish life, shining bright in the light of wealth. However, behind that glamorous facade, a tragedy has unfolded. Before the eyes of many, he ruthlessly humiliated his pregnant wife just to be with a lover. 3 years have passed. How has everything changed? Will he realize the true value of love and family, or will he continue to drown in tumultuous affairs? Join us as we explore this emotional tale, where wrong choices lead to painful lessons. Let's delve deeper. Let's embrace these wonderful emotions together. Lucas Anderson sat in his luxurious office, the skyline of the city stretching out beneath him. The empire he had built from the ground up was a testament to his relentless ambition, his ability to turn dreams into reality. The sleek modern design of his office, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows, reflected his success. His phone buzzed with notifications, meetings, messages, deals in motion. But despite the overwhelming success he had achieved, something gnawed at him. It was a subtle unease, a feeling that everything he'd worked for was somehow hollow. Across town, Emma Anderson stood in front of the mirror, smoothing down her blouse. She was trying to calm the nerves that fluttered in her stomach, a mixture of excitement and fear. Today was the day she would tell Lucas that she was pregnant. It had been weeks since she found out, and she had been holding on to the secret, unsure of how to share the news. Their relationship had been strained for years, ever since Lucas had thrown himself fully into his career, but Emma hoped that this news would bring them closer together. She checked her phone again, a text from Lucas confirming that he'd meet her for lunch. Her heart raced as she left their home, hoping that this moment could be the start of a new chapter for them, a chance to reconnect, to build the family she had always dreamed of. When Emma arrived at the restaurant, she picked a quiet corner table, her eyes darting to the door every few moments. She tried to focus on the menu, but her mind raced with thoughts of how Lucas might react. Would he be excited? Would he finally slow down, spend more time at home? The thought of raising a child brought her a sense of joy, but also a deep worry. They hadn't been on the same page for a long time. 15 minutes passed, then 30. Lucas still hadn't arrived. Emma's heart sank a little, but she kept telling herself he was probably caught up in a meeting. She had gotten used to his lateness, his divided attention. Another 15 minutes, and finally, she saw him walking through the restaurant's entrance. Her heart lifted, ready to greet him, but her smile quickly faded when she realized he wasn't alone. Beside Lucas was Natalie Grant, a stunning young executive from his company. Emma had heard Lucas mention her name a few times in passing, but she never thought much of it, until now. Seeing them together, laughing as they entered the restaurant, felt like a punch to the gut. Lucas didn't even glance in Emma's direction as he walked past her to a more prominent table in the center of the restaurant, motioning for Natalie to sit. Emma was frozen in place, her mind spinning. He had completely dismissed their lunch, their plans, and her, the mother of his unborn child. Trying to gather herself, Emma stood and approached their table, hoping Lucas would acknowledge her. But when he finally looked up, it was with an air of impatience, as if she were an inconvenience. "Oh, Emma, I didn't think you'd be here already," he said, his tone indifferent. Natalie gave a polite, awkward smile, clearly sensing the tension but remaining silent. Emma tried to find her voice, but the words caught in her throat. She had planned to share the most important news of her life, but now it seemed so insignificant compared to the casual way Lucas dismissed her. "We'll talk later," Lucas said, his focus shifting back to Natalie as if Emma had already disappeared. Emma stood there for a moment longer, her heart breaking. Without another word, she turned and left the restaurant, tears stinging her eyes. This wasn't the man she had fallen in love with. This wasn't the life she had imagined. As Emma stepped into the cold afternoon air, the weight of her situation hit her fully. Lucas had chosen his career, his ambition, and now, possibly even another woman, over her. She was pregnant, alone, and faced with the terrifying prospect of raising a child without the support of the man she had once believed would be her partner in everything. But as she walked away from the restaurant, a new resolve began to form within her. Emma knew she couldn't rely on Lucas anymore. She had to find strength within herself, for her and for the baby she was carrying. Emma sat at the quiet corner of the restaurant, nervously fiddling with the napkin in her lap. Her heart raced as she imagined how Lucas might react when she told him the news that could change everything. She kept glancing at the entrance, waiting for him to arrive. Time passed slowly, each minute that ticked by making her feel more anxious. Her phone buzzed again, another notification, but not from Lucas. She sighed and tried to focus on the menu in front of her, though she couldn't make sense of the words. All she could think about was the life growing inside her and how she was about to break the news to her husband, hoping it would bring them closer together. But Lucas was late. 15 minutes. Then 30. It wasn't unusual for him to be delayed, she had grown used to it. His work at the company consumed most of his time, and lately, they had been drifting apart. But today was different. This lunch was supposed to be special, a chance for them to reconnect. Another 10 minutes passed, and Emma was starting to lose hope. Just as she was considering texting him again, she saw him enter the restaurant. Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. Lucas wasn't alone. Walking beside him was Natalie Grant, the young, attractive executive from his company. Emma had heard of Natalie before, her name mentioned in passing during conversations about work, but she never imagined seeing them together like this. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she watched them laughing, casually walking in as if they were the ones on a lunch date. Lucas didn't even seem to notice her sitting there. She waited, frozen in her seat, expecting him to come over, to explain why he had brought someone else to their lunch. But he didn't. Instead, Lucas guided Natalie to a table at the center of the restaurant, a more prominent spot where they could be seen by everyone. Emma stared in disbelief as he pulled out a chair for Natalie, completely disregarding the fact that Emma was already there, waiting for him. For a moment, Emma considered walking over to confront them. But when she saw the way Lucas looked at Natalie, charmed, attentive, as if she were the only person in the room, Emma's courage faltered. She could hardly believe what was happening. This was the man she had built a life with, the man she was carrying a child for. And yet here he was, so engrossed in his conversation with another woman that he didn't even acknowledge her presence. Determined to say something, Emma stood up and walked over to their table, her heart pounding in her chest. As she approached, Lucas finally noticed her, his expression shifting to one of mild surprise, as if he hadn't expected to see her there. "Oh, Emma," he said, barely looking at her. "I didn't realize you'd be here so soon." His voice was casual, indifferent, as if she had interrupted something unimportant. Natalie glanced between them, her smile fading slightly, sensing the awkward tension. Emma struggled to find her voice, the words she had rehearsed in her mind dissolving into the air. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. She had imagined a tender moment, where she'd share the news and they'd embrace, maybe even talk about their future together as a family. But now, standing there in front of Lucas and Natalie, it all felt wrong. "We were supposed to have lunch," Emma finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas glanced at his watch, then back at her. "Yeah, I'm really sorry, but something came up. We'll talk later, okay?" And just like that, he dismissed her. Emma stood frozen, disbelief and heartbreak crashing over her. She didn't know whether to cry or scream. Instead, she simply nodded, turning on her heel and walking out of the restaurant, her vision blurred with tears. As she stepped outside into the cold afternoon, Emma's world began to unravel. The man she had trusted, the man she had built her life with, had just humiliated her in front of a colleague. And the worst part was, he didn't even seem to care. Emma wiped her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had a life growing inside of her, a child who would soon need her strength. And in that moment, Emma knew that if she couldn't rely on Lucas, she would have to find that strength within herself. The decision to leave Lucas had been the hardest one Emma had ever made, but after that painful day at the restaurant, she knew it was the only choice. She packed her things quietly and quickly, not wanting to linger in the house they once shared. There was no point in trying to salvage something that had long since crumbled. With a heavy heart, she left behind the life they had built together, taking only her essentials, and the baby growing inside her. Emma moved to a smaller, quieter neighborhood far from the shadow of Lucas and his sprawling empire. It was a modest place, nothing compared to the luxuries she had grown accustomed to during her years with him, but it felt like a fresh start. She rented a small apartment, focusing on preparing for the arrival of her child. It wasn't easy, especially with the emotional weight she carried, but the thought of her baby gave her purpose and kept her moving forward. A few months later, Emma gave birth to a beautiful daughter she named Sophie. The moment she held Sophie in her arms, everything shifted. The pain of her past with Lucas faded, replaced by an overwhelming love and responsibility for this tiny human being. Sophie became her entire world, the reason Emma woke up every day with renewed strength and determination. As Sophie grew, so did Emma's ambitions. She decided to channel her energy into something meaningful. Drawing on her passion for education and her experience volunteering at various charities, she opened a small school for underprivileged children. The school started modestly, with only a handful of students and limited resources, but it quickly gained momentum. Parents from the community were grateful for the opportunity it provided their children, and Emma's school began to flourish. Despite the fulfillment she found in her work and the joy Sophie brought into her life, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. When Sophie was about 2 years old, Emma started noticing small signs that her daughter wasn't developing like other children. She was often tired, struggled to keep up with other toddlers, and sometimes had difficulty breathing after simple activities. Concerned, Emma took Sophie to several doctors. After a series of tests, she received devastating news: Sophie had been born with a congenital heart condition that would require surgery. The doctor explained that it was a serious but treatable condition, though the road ahead would be challenging. Emma was overwhelmed. The weight of being a single mother had already been heavy, but now it felt crushing. She had no one to lean on, no one to share the burden of Sophie's health issues. Her mind drifted back to Lucas, but she quickly pushed the thought away. He hadn't been there when she needed him, and she had no intention of asking for his help now. Still, the reality of Sophie's condition left Emma terrified. Her heart ached every time she saw her daughter struggle, and the medical expenses were piling up. The school, though successful, didn't provide enough income to cover everything. Emma found herself working late into the night, trying to figure out how she would manage Sophie's care while keeping the school running. Every day felt like a test of her strength and resilience. But Emma refused to give up. Sophie's laughter, her small hand gripping Emma's tightly, gave her all the motivation she needed. Emma threw herself into her work even more, expanding the school, seeking out donations and partnerships to support her mission. She was determined to build a future for Sophie, no matter the obstacles. Through it all, Emma learned to embrace her independence. She became a fierce advocate for her daughter, navigating the complex world of hospitals, doctors, and medical treatments. She fought for Sophie's health and for the education of the children in her care, all while trying to maintain a sense of normalcy in their little home. If you think the story is good, leave a comment with the number 1, and if not, please subscribe to the channel. If the video is helpful to you, don't forget to hit the like button. Though there were nights when Emma lay awake, consumed by fear and exhaustion, she never regretted her decision to leave Lucas. She had found strength she didn't know she had, and in the process, she had built a life for herself and Sophie, one filled with love, purpose, and hope for the future. Emma knew there would be more challenges ahead, especially with Sophie's condition, but she faced them with the quiet confidence of someone who had already weathered the worst storm. She had started over, and no matter what, she would continue to fight for the life she had created for her and her daughter. 3 years had passed since Emma walked out of Lucas's life. In that time, Lucas had buried himself even deeper into his work, expanding his business empire further than ever before. His name was synonymous with success, and every major deal he touched seemed to turn to gold. But despite the accolades and financial triumphs, there was an emptiness inside him, a hollowness he couldn't explain. He had pushed thoughts of Emma out of his mind, convincing himself that she was just another chapter of his life that had ended. He never knew about the child she was carrying when she left, and he never asked. That all changed one evening when Lucas received an unexpected phone call. He was in the middle of a high-stakes negotiation when his phone buzzed with a number he didn't recognize. Annoyed by the interruption, he considered ignoring it, but something made him answer. "Mr. Anderson," came the voice on the other end, hesitant but urgent. "Yes, this is Lucas Anderson," he replied curtly, his mind still half focused on the deal at hand. "I'm calling from St. Mary's Hospital. There's a patient here, a little girl named Sophie Anderson. She's in need of urgent surgery, and her records list you as her father." Lucas's world stopped. He blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. "What did you say?" "Sophie Anderson. She's 3 years old, and according to our records, you're her father. She's been admitted for an emergency heart surgery, and we need your confirmation for some of the paperwork." Lucas's hand tightened around the phone, his pulse quickening. "A daughter?" His mind raced, scrambling to make sense of the words. Sophie. Emma had left 3 years ago, and in all that time, he had never once considered the possibility that she might have been pregnant. His chest tightened as the weight of his actions from the past hit him all at once. "I'll be there immediately," Lucas said, his voice thick with emotion, before hanging up. The drive to the hospital felt like a blur. His mind was a storm of questions, guilt, and disbelief. How could Emma not have told him? How could he have been so blind, so wrapped up in his career and his own world that he missed something this important? The image of a small child lying in a hospital bed, needing life-saving surgery, haunted him as he sped through the city streets. When Lucas arrived at St. Mary's, the sterile hospital air hit him like a wall. He hurried through the hallways, his heart pounding in his chest. Finally, he reached the pediatric wing, where a nurse directed him to Sophie's room. His stomach churned with nerves, a mixture of fear and regret flooding through him. And then, he saw her. Through the small window in the door, Lucas caught a glimpse of the little girl lying in the hospital bed. She was pale and fragile, her tiny chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Beside her, sitting quietly, was Emma. She looked tired, worn down by the weight of worry, but she hadn't noticed him yet. Lucas stood frozen, staring at the scene before him. Sophie was his daughter. There was no mistaking the familiar features, the soft brown curls, the delicate shape of her nose. A surge of emotion welled up inside him, overwhelming him with the realization of what he had missed. This little girl, his own flesh and blood, had existed for 3 years without him even knowing. He felt a deep sense of shame and regret, knowing that his actions had led to this, his obsession with work, his coldness toward Emma, his selfish choices. And now, his daughter was lying in a hospital bed, fighting for her life, and he hadn't been there for her. Taking a deep breath, Lucas knocked gently on the door. Emma looked up, her eyes widening in surprise and confusion when she saw him standing there. She rose slowly from her seat, meeting him at the doorway. "What are you doing here, Lucas?" she asked, her voice guarded, the pain of the past still lingering in her eyes. "I got a call from the hospital," he said quietly. "They told me about Sophie." Emma's expression softened, but only slightly. "You don't have to be here. We're managing just fine without you." Lucas swallowed hard, guilt washing over him. "I didn't know. I had no idea, Emma. If I had—" "You didn't want to know," she interrupted, her voice tight with emotion. "You were too busy with your business, too focused on everything else but us." She was right, and Lucas knew it. He had been too wrapped up in his empire, in his drive for success, to see what was right in front of him. And now, he was paying the price for it. "I want to help," Lucas said softly, his voice filled with sincerity. "I want to be here for Sophie, for you. Please, let me help." Emma stared at him for a long moment, the pain of their past still evident in her eyes. But as she looked back at Sophie, her expression softened. She nodded, though there was hesitation in her movements. Fine, she said quietly. But this isn't about us, Lucas. It's about her. Lucas stood at the doorway of Sophie's hospital room, feeling the weight of his past mistakes press down on him. His heart ached as he looked at his daughter, lying so fragile in the hospital bed. He had spent years chasing wealth and success, oblivious to the life he had left behind. Now, standing here, all of that seemed meaningless. The realization of what he had lost hit him harder than any business failure ever could. Emma, still standing by Sophie's bedside, watched Lucas carefully. Her guard was up, a defensive shield that had taken years to build. She hadn't expected to see him here, not after everything that had happened. But now, with Sophie so vulnerable, Emma didn't have the energy to fight him off. Her heart was torn between the past they had shared and the pain he had caused. Lucas took a hesitant step into the room, his eyes locked on Emma. She looked exhausted, shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there when they were together. She had been carrying the weight of their daughter's illness all by herself, and he had been completely absent. The guilt gnawed at him, but he forced himself to focus on what mattered now, Sophie. "I'm so sorry, Emma," Lucas began, his voice raw with emotion. "I should have been here. I should have known." Emma crossed her arms, her expression still guarded. "You didn't want to know, Lucas. You made your choice a long time ago." Her words stung, but Lucas knew she was right. He had been consumed by his career, by Natalie, by everything that didn't matter. He had pushed Emma away, leaving her to fend for herself. And now, the consequences of his choices stood before him in the form of a sick little girl. "I want to make it right," Lucas said, stepping closer to Sophie's bed. "I want to help. Whatever it takes, Emma. Please." Emma's gaze softened slightly as she looked at Sophie, her expression filled with the fierce protectiveness of a mother. "This isn't about us, Lucas," she said quietly. "It's about her. She needs the surgery, and she needs it soon." Lucas nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I'll do whatever it takes. I'll pay for everything, her medical bills, the surgery. Just let me help." Emma hesitated, the years of hurt making it hard for her to trust him. But the truth was, they needed the money, and Lucas was the only one who could provide it. She couldn't let her pride stand in the way of Sophie's health. Slowly, she nodded, though the distance between them still felt vast. "Thank you," Lucas said softly, relief washing over him. He pulled a chair closer to Sophie's bed and sat down, watching his daughter breathe. It was the first time he had truly seen her, and the sight filled him with both love and sorrow. He had missed so much. As the hours passed, Lucas stayed by Sophie's side. Emma remained quiet, her emotions too complicated to voice. She had loved Lucas once, deeply, but that love had been shattered by his choices, by his indifference. Seeing him here now, trying to make amends, stirred feelings she had buried long ago. But forgiveness didn't come easily, not after what she had been through. The tension between them was palpable, but the focus remained on Sophie. The doctors came and went, updating them on her condition, and every word felt like a lifeline for both of them. Lucas asked questions, eager to understand, to catch up on the years he had missed. He saw Emma's weariness, the strain that had been her constant companion, and it only deepened his regret. Finally, as night fell and the hospital grew quiet, Emma spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You left us, Lucas." Lucas looked at her, pain etched in his features. "I know, Emma. And I've regretted it every day." Emma shook her head, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "It wasn't just about me. You abandoned Sophie, even before you knew she existed." Her words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Lucas had no defense, no excuse. He had chosen his career over his family, and now he was trying to pick up the pieces. But he knew it wouldn't be that simple. "I want to be here now," he said quietly. "For both of you. I can't change the past, but I can try to make things right from now on." Emma didn't respond right away, her thoughts tangled in the memories of their time together. She had once believed in Lucas, had trusted him with her heart. But trust was fragile, and his betrayal had left deep scars. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Lucas," she finally said, her voice breaking. "But Sophie deserves to have her father in her life." Lucas nodded, accepting the weight of her words. He couldn't expect forgiveness, not yet. But he was willing to fight for it, just as he was willing to fight for Sophie's life. "I'll be here," Lucas promised, his voice steady. "Whatever you need, I'll be here." As the night wore on, they both sat in silence, the gulf between them still wide but with a shared purpose now linking them together, Sophie. It was a fragile reunion, but it was a start. And for now, that was enough. Just as Lucas was beginning to make headway in his attempts to reconnect with Emma and Sophie, an unexpected complication re-entered his life: Natalie Grant. Their relationship had fizzled out soon after Emma had left, but now, with Lucas spending more time away from his office and dedicating himself to his family, Natalie found herself feeling increasingly shut out. She had always been ambitious, drawn to Lucas's power and success, but she hadn't anticipated that he would suddenly distance himself from her life without an explanation. One afternoon, while Lucas was at the hospital for another meeting with Sophie's doctors, Natalie showed up unannounced. She walked into his office as if nothing had changed, her presence a jarring reminder of the life Lucas had been trying to leave behind. "Lucas," she said, her voice smooth and familiar, as she leaned against his desk. "We need to talk." He glanced up, startled to see her standing there. His initial reaction was one of discomfort. Natalie was a part of his past, one he was trying to move away from, but now, she was here, and he wasn't sure how to handle it. "Natalie," he replied, his tone guarded. "This isn't a good time." Natalie crossed her arms, a flash of annoyance crossing her face. "It's never a good time anymore, is it? You've been distant, distracted. I'm starting to wonder what's going on." Lucas sighed, standing up from his chair. "A lot has changed, Natalie. I'm not the same person I was when we were together. I have responsibilities now, ones I didn't even know about before." "Responsibilities," she echoed, raising an eyebrow. "You mean Emma, don't you? And that child?" "Yes, Sophie," Lucas said firmly. "She's my daughter, and she's been going through some serious health issues. I need to be there for her, and for Emma. That's where my focus is now." Natalie's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, she seemed genuinely taken aback. "So that's it?" she asked, her voice sharper now. "You're just walking away from everything we had? From everything we were building together?" Lucas met her gaze steadily. "What we had wasn't real, Natalie. It was built on convenience, on ambition. But that's not enough anymore. I need to be there for my daughter, and for Emma. This is my family." Natalie's expression hardened, her earlier surprise giving way to anger. "You think you can just waltz back into Emma's life, play the hero, and everything will be fine? You left her, Lucas. You chose me. Or have you forgotten that?" "I haven't forgotten anything," Lucas replied, his voice calm but resolute. "And I'm not trying to erase the past. I'm just trying to do what's right now. I owe that to Sophie." Natalie shook her head, disbelief written all over her face. "You're making a mistake, Lucas. You think Emma's just going to forgive you? That she'll take you back after everything you've done? People don't change that easily." Lucas could hear the bitterness in her voice, and he knew that part of her frustration came from feeling rejected. He had been distant with her for weeks, too preoccupied with Sophie's health and trying to rebuild his relationship with Emma. But he couldn't let Natalie drag him back into the life he had been living before. "I'm not asking Emma for forgiveness," Lucas said, his voice steady. "I'm trying to be there for Sophie. That's what matters now." Natalie stared at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and disappointment. "You think you're going to be happy playing house with Emma and your daughter? You're going to get bored, Lucas. You're going to miss the life you had. The business, the power, the freedom." Lucas felt a flicker of frustration, but he kept his composure. "I used to think that success and power were all that mattered, but I was wrong. I missed out on years of my daughter's life because I was too focused on the wrong things. I won't make that mistake again." Natalie stood there for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she straightened up and smoothed down her skirt, regaining some of her poise. "Fine," she said coolly. "If that's what you want. But don't come crying to me when you realize what you've thrown away." With that, she turned and walked out of his office, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. Lucas watched her go, feeling a strange sense of finality. This was the end of that chapter of his life, and while it hadn't ended on the best terms, he knew it was necessary. Natalie represented the part of him that had chased success at any cost, even when it meant losing sight of what truly mattered. Now, standing in the quiet of his office, Lucas felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had made his choice. His future wasn't in the world of power plays and empty relationships, it was with Emma and Sophie. It wouldn't be easy to rebuild the trust he had lost, but he was committed to making things right. The distractions of his old life, including Natalie, no longer held the same appeal. His focus was clear now, and for the first time in years, Lucas felt like he was on the right path. As the days turned into weeks, Lucas found himself spending more and more time with Sophie at the hospital, and gradually, he became a part of her world. Her laugh, her bright smile, and the way she held his hand reminded him of all the things he had missed. It pained him to think of the years he hadn't been there, but now, he was determined not to miss any more. Lucas had always been a man of action, someone who took charge, and this situation was no different. He had already made the financial arrangements for Sophie's surgery, ensuring that she would get the best care possible. But Lucas knew that money wasn't enough. Sophie didn't just need medical care, she needed a father who was present, who was fully committed. And Emma deserved more than the half-hearted promises he had given her in the past. She had been the one holding everything together while he had been consumed by his career, and now it was time for him to step up and take responsibility for both of them. As he sat in his office one afternoon, looking out over the city skyline, Lucas realized that his empire, the business he had spent his entire life building, meant nothing if it came at the cost of his family. He had spent so many years chasing success, wealth, and power, thinking that they were the ultimate goals. But now, with Sophie's life hanging in the balance and Emma still wary of trusting him again, he understood that true success wasn't measured by the size of his company or the numbers on his bank statement. It was time to make a change. A real change. Lucas picked up the phone and called his lawyer. "I want to make some arrangements," he said firmly. "I'm stepping down from the company." The lawyer paused, clearly taken aback. "Stepping down? Are you sure, Mr. Anderson? Your company is at its peak right now. This might not be the best time." "It's the right time," Lucas interrupted. "I've been thinking about this for a while. It's time for me to focus on what really matters." He could hear the hesitation on the other end of the line, but Lucas didn't waver. He had made his decision. Stepping down from the company was the only way to truly commit to his family. He couldn't keep one foot in his old life and one in his new. If he was going to make things right with Emma and be there for Sophie, he needed to be all in. "I'm also donating a significant portion of my wealth to the school Emma started," Lucas continued. "I want to make sure it has the resources it needs to expand and help more children." The lawyer was silent for a moment before finally responding. "I'll draw up the paperwork." "But Lucas, are you absolutely sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything," Lucas said quietly. Once the call was over, Lucas sat back in his chair, feeling a sense of calm settle over him. For the first time in years, he felt like he was making the right choice. He was sacrificing the life he had known, the power, the prestige, the business empire, for something far more important. He was choosing his family. And while it was a difficult decision, it also felt like the most natural one he had ever made. A few days later, Lucas sat down with Emma at the hospital, ready to tell her about his decision. She looked tired, worn down by the stress of Sophie's upcoming surgery, but there was a strength in her that he had always admired. It was one of the reasons he had fallen in love with her in the first place. "I've made a decision," Lucas said, his voice steady. I'm stepping down from the company. Emma looked at him, surprised. What? Lucas, your company is your life. It was my life, Lucas corrected her. But not anymore. I'm donating most of my wealth to help fund Sophie's treatment and to support your school. You've built something incredible, Emma, and I want to be a part of it. I want to help you make a difference. Emma's eyes softened, but there was still a trace of skepticism. Why now, Lucas? Why are you doing this? Because I've finally realized what matters, he said quietly. I've spent too many years chasing the wrong things. I thought success was about money and power, but it's not. It's about family. It's about being there for the people you love. And I want to be there for you and Sophie. Emma studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Lucas held his breath, hoping that she would see how sincere he was, how committed he was to this new path. Finally, Emma nodded, though her guard was still up. I appreciate what you're doing, Lucas. But this isn't going to fix everything. It's going to take time, a lot of time. I know, Lucas said, his voice filled with quiet determination. I'm not asking for forgiveness right away. I just want the chance to prove that I'm serious. As they sat together, the tension between them began to ease, just slightly. It was a small step forward, but it was progress. And for Lucas, that was enough. He had made his sacrifice, and now it was time to rebuild the life he had nearly lost. As Sophie's surgery approached, Lucas remained a constant presence at the hospital, spending every waking moment with his daughter and Emma. The distance between him and Emma hadn't completely disappeared, but there was a quiet understanding between them now, a recognition that they were both here for the same reason, Sophie. The day of Sophie's surgery finally arrived. Emma sat in the waiting room, her hands trembling as she tried to stay calm. Lucas sat beside her, his face etched with worry. He wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be fine, but he knew that words wouldn't be enough. All they could do was wait and hope. Hours passed, each one feeling longer than the last. Finally, the surgeon emerged, a calm expression on his face. The surgery was a success, he said. Sophie's condition has been stabilized, and with time, she should make a full recovery. Emma let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, tears of relief welling up in her eyes. Lucas reached for her hand instinctively, and for the first time in years, she didn't pull away. They sat there, hand in hand, united in their relief and their love for Sophie. Over the next few weeks, Sophie began to recover, growing stronger each day. Lucas remained by her side, reading to her, playing games, and making her laugh. For the first time in his life, he felt truly fulfilled. It wasn't the business deals or the success that brought him this sense of peace, it was being with his daughter, watching her heal, and knowing that he had been there when she needed him the most. As Sophie's health improved, so did the relationship between Lucas and Emma. It wasn't an overnight transformation, there were still moments of tension, still memories of the hurt that Lucas had caused. But there was also a growing sense of trust, built slowly over time as Lucas proved, day by day, that he was committed to being the father Sophie needed and the partner Emma had once hoped for. One afternoon, as they walked through the park together with Sophie, Emma turned to Lucas, her expression thoughtful. "You've changed," she said quietly. Lucas looked at her, surprised by the statement but understanding its weight. "I had to," he replied. "I couldn't keep living the way I was. I didn't realize what I was losing until it was almost too late." Emma nodded, watching as Sophie ran ahead of them, her laughter filling the air. "I never thought I'd be able to forgive you," she admitted. "But seeing how you've been with Sophie, how you've been here for her, it's made me see that maybe people can change." Lucas's heart swelled with hope at her words. "I'm not asking for everything to go back to the way it was," he said softly. "I just want a chance to be a part of your lives. To be the father Sophie deserves and to make up for the time I lost." Emma smiled, a small but genuine smile, and for the first time, Lucas saw the woman he had fallen in love with all those years ago. "We'll see," she said, her voice gentle. "One step at a time." Lucas knew that trust couldn't be rebuilt overnight, but this moment, this small glimmer of hope, was enough to keep him going. He had made sacrifices, his career, his wealth, his old life, but in return, he had gained something far more valuable, his family. As the weeks turned into months, Sophie continued to thrive, and Lucas found himself fully immersed in his new role as a father. He spent less time thinking about the business he had once poured his life into and more time focusing on the little moments that truly mattered, watching Sophie take her first steps after her recovery, hearing her laugh, reading her bedtime stories. Emma, too, began to soften. While she hadn't fully let Lucas back into her heart, the walls she had built were slowly coming down. She saw how dedicated he was to Sophie, how he had truly changed, and bit by bit, she allowed herself to trust him again. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of Emma's small home, watching Sophie play in the yard, Lucas turned to Emma, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for giving me this chance," he said quietly. Emma looked at him, her eyes reflecting the journey they had been on. "You earned it, Lucas. You've earned every bit of it." They sat in silence for a moment, watching as Sophie ran through the grass, her energy and joy a stark contrast to the fragile child she had been just months ago. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Lucas felt a sense of peace. He had found his way back to the people who mattered most, and while the road ahead wouldn't be easy, he was ready to walk it, step by step, together with Emma and Sophie. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the yard, Lucas felt a quiet contentment settle over him. The mistakes of the past were behind him, and ahead lay the promise of a future filled with love, forgiveness, and second chances. For Lucas, that was more than enough. Thank you for listening. See you in the next episode. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Goodbye.